Hey guys, today we're going to talk about how to use the bow a little bit. So first thing you need to do is grab a pencil. Any pencil will do as long as it's long and straight. You don't want to use a mechanical pencil or a pen because it has these little clips on it. You don't need that. You just need a long straight pencil. Doesn't matter if it's sharpened or not. This is always the first step I recommend when I talk about how to use the bow for my students. So grab the pencil. You want to hold it up with your left hand. Now the bow is going to be in your right hand whenever you use your instrument. But for right now we're going to put the pencil in our left hand. Doesn't matter which end. You're going to take your right hand and we're going to make a little curve with our thumb, with our right thumb. It's going to look like that. You can think of the top of your thumb right here as being like a little shelf. So you're going to set things on a shelf normally, right? So this is the same idea here. You got your pencil in your left hand. You're going to pull your thumb over and you're going to set the pencil right there on your thumb. Just like that. So it's not wrapped around it. It's not anything weird like this. It's just sitting right on the shelf. Okay, now from there, pull it back sideways. From there, you just want to take your fingers and wrap them around the top. And that's your basic bow hold. Now it's going to be a little bit different per instrument, and I'll show you that in a second. But as long as you get this basic idea, this is what you want. Your middle finger is going to be pretty much right across from your thumb. If you look right there, you can see that. And depending on your bow hold, the way your instrument is oriented, so if it's up on your shoulder or down on the floor like a cello or a bass, you're going to adjust this bow hold just a little bit. And let me show you what that looks like. So first practice this. Make sure you get this comfortable. And if you notice, my fingers are just kind of laying comfortably across here. They're all kind of tilted over. They're not straight up and down like this. I'm not using like Pac-Man hands, like flat fingers. Everything's nice and curved. I'll show you from this direction. Everything's nice and curved, so I still have that nice curved thumb. I still have the little shelf with my thumb. It's not flat like this. Nice and curved. Fingers are still curved. My pinky right now is sitting right on top. Because usually when I play an instrument, I play violin or viola usually, so I'm used to my pinky being on top. I'll show you something a little bit different later on for cellos and basses, but fingers are right on top. They're nice and relaxed. The pencil or the bow will be the stick of the bow is going to be going right about your first knuckle on this first finger, so it shouldn't be too far over. It's kind of hard to do even. It shouldn't be like that. It should be pretty comfortable. If you feel like it's uncomfortable, you might be holding it too tightly or with fingers too close together or too spread out. Everything should be nice and comfortable. And there's a little space between my fingers to give it some room to move, some room to adjust. Okay? So let me show you what this looks like with different bows. This is a violin bow, but it'll be the same for a viola bow because it's pretty much really close to the same size, so the setup is the same. The bow parts that we need to be concerned with are the frog down here, this little square part, little wooden part. There's a little indention right here. Hopefully you can see that. Let me move it over so you can see a little easier. There's a little indention right here. We have the winding right here. There's a little pad right here to protect your fingers from getting too sore, and the screw on the end. Now, of course, the first thing you always want to do when you get your bow ready is tighten it up. I've already tightened this one. You can see right now the bow hair, I'm not going to touch it with my fingers. I'll set this pencil on it. The bow hair, if I set this down, is not going to touch the string unless I push on it. Okay? And that's what you want. If you set your bow down on your instrument and the hair just lays right on it like that, it's too loose. So if it was too loose, I would need to turn this through to the right or clockwise and make sure it gets a little bit more tightened up. If it was too tight, and the way you can tell that is if the stick right here, hopefully you can see this with this camera, the stick has a little bit of a curve to it right here. Okay, and you want there to be a little bit of a curve to your bow. Every bow is a little different, but you want there to be some kind of curve because if it's all the way straight, it's too tight and you can break the tip off. So my bow right now is good because it's not too loose where the stick is or where the string is hitting the stick, but it's also loose enough where there's still a little bit of a curve to the end of the bow right here. So that's good. If you want to loosen your bow, you would turn to the left, turn the screw to the left. If you want to tighten it, you would turn it to the right. So back to how we hold the bow. We go down to the frog side, not the tip end, but the frog end. Our thumb, we're still going to make a little shelf with our thumb, so practice that. Nice curve to your thumb right here. You're going to act like this is a little shelf right on the tip of it. We're going to take that shelf and we're going to set it right here on the edge next to the frog. We're not going to put it through here like that. We're going to set the thumb right here, set the stick right here on the edge of the frog. Now I always tell my students not to touch the bow hair with their fingers, but if the end of the hair right here kind of brushes against the edge of your thumb, like where your thumbnail ends, that's okay. It's not going to hurt anything really, right there. You just don't want your fingertips to touch it too much. So I let my thumb kind of rest right there on the edge. You notice I've got my thumb right on the edge here. It's not through. It's right on the edge. Still have a nice curved thumb on the back. Nice shelf right there on the tip of your thumb. Then you do the same way with the pencil. You just curve your fingers over the top. Now this is a violin bow, so again, using my, actually I'll show you on the violin. since the instrument is going to be up on your shoulder, your hand is going to be upright. The bow is going to be vertical this way. Hopefully you can see that. It's going to be vertical up and down. So your fingers don't need to be over the bow to hold it up because the instrument's going to hold it up. You just need to have it right sitting on top. My pinky rests on top. I have kind of a short pinky, so it just kind of sits there on top. The rest of my hand, just like with the pencil, the exact same thing. My middle finger is right over top of my thumb. The other fingers are all just kind of resting on top. And you can see right there, that first knuckle is where, on my first finger, is where the bow stick sits. Okay? And this will be the same for violin or viola. Now you want your pinky to be curved, if you can. You want all your fingers to be nice and curved and relaxed. And you want your wrist to be able to be flexible. So you want to lock everything down. You don't want to squeeze. You want everything to be flexible. Okay, so keep everything nice and relaxed. If your hand moves a little bit, there are different ways that some different techniques teach, or different places I should say, that some techniques teach to hold the bow. I always tell my students to hold it right here. If you move down a little bit, that's not that big of a deal. Some people play like that. A lot of cellists play like that. A lot of a lot of European violinists and violists play like that. I tell mine to hold it down here. They get a little bit more leverage. My students get a little bit more leverage around the frog that way. But that's what I always tell them. Next, so that's the violin or viola bow. Next, we have a cello bow, and you can see it's a little bit bigger. Here's the cello bow. Here's a violin bow. You can probably tell the stick is a little bit bigger on the cello bow, a little bit thicker, a little bit longer. I'm going to tighten this up because I actually hadn't tightened it yet, so I'm going to turn this to the right. And what I'm watching for is to make sure that it looks like, again with the pencil here, the hair is not going to touch the stick unless I push down, which you don't really ever need to do unless you're getting a really aggressive bow. So the stick is going to be off the hair, and there's still a little bit curved down here, so it's not too tight. Now, for a cello bow, because the instruments themselves sit vertically, the bow is going to be horizontal because you always play the opposite way. So the bow is going to sit flat like this instead of up like that, like it does for violin and viola. So for cello, you still make a curved thumb, still set your thumb there on the shelf, or set the bow right there on the shelf of your thumb. Wrap your fingers around, but your fingers can come all the way down to the bottom of the frog because you have to hold it up. You have to hold the bow up. Okay? And when you're doing this, if you practice this at home, always make sure when you're starting out, you're holding the bow with your left hand on the other side of the bow toward the tip end. Because if you don't, especially for people first starting out, the tip is really heavy. It gets really awkward and unwieldy at that end. So this just helps hold it up. Normally, of course, this would be resting on the instrument or on the strings as we play. So let's do that again. Here's your thumb, make a shelf, rest the bow on the shelf, wrap your fingers around, and you see my fingers come almost, I have kind of short fingers, but they come almost all the way down to the bottom of the frog. Okay? And you see the rest of it looks pretty much the same. I still have some space right here. My other finger is still on top. My pinky's pretty much on top. Your pinky can come down a little bit too, but like I said, my hands are short, so it doesn't come down too far. And for me, this is a comfortable grip. Okay, so there's a cello bow. The bass bow is this one here, and compared to the violin bow, hopefully you can see how much bigger that is. Much, much bigger. The hair is also much, much bigger. And this is actually a really nice bass bow that we have here at the school. All the parts are the same though, and the same idea applies as cello. So your instrument is going to be vertical because it's a bass and it sits on the floor. Your hand is going to go, or your bow is going to go this way into the instrument, so you need to have your hand, same thing, shelf, right here. Nice curved thumb. That's really important. If your thumb ever gets straightened out like that, you'll know it because you'll start to feel pain right here. It'll feel tight and tense like you're getting a sore muscle, right in this kind of fat part of your hand where that muscle is. If you keep your thumb nice and relaxed, or nice and curved, I should say, this can be a little bit more relaxed, especially on these bigger bows where it sits like this, and you have to hold it up. And then bring your fingers on around, and hold it up from there. Okay? So that's the idea for the bow. Now, you always want to make sure when you get done with the bow that you loosen it up. So I'm going to loosen this one up, although it's pretty loose already. And I didn't loosen my cello bow up yet, so I'll do that as well. So we're going to turn it to the left, or counterclockwise. If you think about the opposite direction a clock moves, that's counterclockwise. Turn it to the left, make sure it's a little bit loose. So this way, if I were to put this back on my instrument, without pushing down, the hair just rests right on the stick. Okay, now we're not going to play with it like this, with it loose like this, but that's a good way to know if it's loose or not. Also, if you're trying to loosen up a bow, there should be a point where as you're turning this through, all of a sudden it feels really easy to turn. When you get to that point where it just feels really easy, you can stop there, because usually that's loose enough. But if you see the hair move a little bit, or you could set it on your instrument and the hair touches the stick without pushing down on it, just with gravity, then you're probably in pretty good shape there. Okay, so practice that on your own. Just make sure if you have any questions, start with the pencil first, take it slow. Pencil doesn't have very much weight to it, so it's not going to hurt your hand. Practice making the shelf with your thumb. Wrap your fingers around, and if all else fails, you get this grip on a pencil, and just practice that grip on a pencil. Okay, keep all your fingers nice and curved, keep everything relaxed. Make sure your hand is able to move back and forth like this with your wrist, like you're waving goodbye to somebody. You're telling them goodbye. Everything up here stays the same, nothing changes here, but your wrist is able to relax and move. Okay, that's really important for when we start moving back and forth on the strings later on. One more thing I want to show you. I'll show you on a violin, but this is going to be the same on any instrument, any string instruments. On all your instruments, you have the end of the fingerboard right here, and you also have the bridge down here. That's pretty much where you want to bow. This space between is pretty much where you want to bow the strings. It may be a little bit different on bass depending on how tall you are, how big your bass is, but in general, you want to try to bow between, in this area right here, this little gap between the end of the fingerboard and the bridge. You want to keep that area for where you pluck and where you bow. So if I run a cello, if this were a cello, I would want to be bowing right here across the strings. Okay, just like this, left and right. Now it's really important to do this, we call it perpendicular to the strings, or 90 degrees of the strings. So on the violin, for example, I'll turn sideways so you can see. My strings are running this way down the instrument, which means my bow, to be perpendicular, 90 degrees, has to be sitting on the strings like this, the opposite direction that the strings are going. Okay, so when I pull with my bow, this direction, you need to keep the strings, keep that bow hair straight. If your bow goes sideways, like this, you get really ugly, screechy sounds, and it doesn't make a very clear sound. So you always want the bow to go straight, which means your wrist has to be able to move. So let me show you a little bit easier here. If I pull straight down without letting my wrist bend, this is what happens. If I pull my arm straight down, because my wrist can't bend, so the bow has to adjust the angle to move with my wrist. If I adjust my wrist angle and let it kind of bend a little bit as I move my arm out, then I can do this. I can keep, sorry, I'm running into my desk here. Let me move back. I can move this and keep my bow straight. Make sense? So keep your wrist straight, or keep your wrist loose, I should say, so that your bow can stay straight. You always want your bow to be perpendicular to the strings. And it's a little bit easier to see on a cello or a bass because you kind of look down and watch. But you always want to make sure that your bow stays perpendicular to wherever your strings are. Hope that helps. If you have any questions, you don't have to play any songs right now with the bow, but if you have any questions, I'll be glad to help you out. Just send me an email, and I will see you later.